Can't remember things that's good. So when the significance virtue of doing a written assessment is this, Mark, it's important to do it because otherwise what tends to happen is you gather an awful lot of notes and an awful lot of information, and basically you can't put any of it together. And I've seen
That's
this
right.
happen time and time and time and time again. And I tell you, Rachel, the worst example, the best example of that is the International Institute of Hand Analysis, the Richard Unger system. Richard Unger is actually probably one of the most guilty people of doing that. And so that's why they've got a 30-fold handshake classification type in their system.
Yeah.
Not because they've thought about it, but because they've just added them all together. So they've got DePontigny's seven handshake
Mm,
types. They've got Bennon's seven mount handshake types. They've got Getting's four element handshake types. Then they've bundled in Richard Gardner's elemental archetypes. So they've ended up they were saying there are 30 handshake types. And they do that with an
mm,
intention to kind of try to be complete and thorough. And if only if they do that, they're not excluding everything. And if they're not, then they have, then they have to include everything. If they don't exclude everything, then of course they can't be wrong. But actually, that's completely wrong. That's completely wrong.
mm,
It's like if you try and include everything, you're not being sufficiently discriminating. The most important skill that you need to have as a hand reader is discernment and differentiation,
yeah.
not integration and collection. Because if you integrate and collect, you just end up with this massive body of knowledge that you can't possibly hold together unless you've got a librarian's mentality. And there are people who can do that, and that's fine for them, but that doesn't actually help you interpret people's hands. What that
So,
does, it makes you a librarian of dead information. And you don't know
mm,
which information you need to extract to apply to the hand of the person you're actually looking at. So that's kind of what you just said there, John. It's like, I've got all this information because it was quite a complex. I mean, the handprint I gave you for that test is quite a complicated handprint, but in a kind of way that makes it kind of easy if you're not that skilled, because there's lots of very obvious things. But if you are quite skilled, you can kind of dig down into it and unwrap it and make it more detailed. But the significance of that is if you're not able to make the differentiation or discernment, then you just end up with this massive amount of notes and you've got no idea where to go and you can't see the wood for the trees. You get lost in all the details. And just about every palmistry book does that. The best example of that, William Benham's Laws of Scientific Handreading. It's a 625 page tome, about half of it on hand shape and about half of it on the lines. And the section on the lines is like every possible variation of every possible line with every possible marking. And he's got a paragraph about each one in this ever increasingly kaleidoscopically complex patterning. And you can't possibly remember it. And that's actually a really, really bad model of how to approach understanding the hand. Actually, what you have to do is you have to do the complete opposite. You have to cut out the crap. You have to differentiate that which is rubbish. You have to throw away the stuff that's not any good. And so and it's like paring away. And it's like, it's the Sherlock Holmes method. Like whatever's left, however improbable, must be what it is because you've got rid of everything else that it could be. So it must be that. And that kind of approach is going to give you better results. And if you don't do that, you're just going to end up being confused. And oh, that's a little, I mean, kind of like you were, John, when I first met you. And you kind of went, oh, there's a really interesting little island about a third of the way down the major Earth line that shows. And my response to you said, well, yeah, but what do they do for a job? And you went, oh, I don't know. Well, fuck that. Fuck what happened to them where they were 33 and a third. Like it doesn't really matter because you're going into the detail, but you can't get something really big and factual about their hands. And it's the same thing for I mean, having a big long debate with Liz. Liz Hallows gave the presentation at the conference about the Myers-Briggs personality type inventory and the hand and the correlations that she's found between those two things, which arguably has to be said is actually very few. But there you go. I'm not going to critique that, but that just tells you something about the difficulties of verifying hand reading, but also the limitations of particular scientific methodologies. So they're two slightly different debates. But one of the things I was arguing with her, she says, "Well, the trouble is, you see," she said, "the trouble is when you're evaluating psychology stuff, when you're evaluating hand reading, you've only got the person's subjective evaluation as to whether you're right or not." And I went, "No, you haven't. What are you talking about?" they're like, well, if you're going to psychologically say they are like this and they are like that, they've either got to do a test or they've got to say, oh, yes, I am a bit introverted. Oh, yes, I am a bit feeling orientated. It's like, well, what about telling what job they do? There's nothing subjective about that whatsoever. And she didn't answer that question. So I said, like, you're measuring the wrong bloody thing. If you want to measure whether hand reading is accurate or not, it has to be accurate in the gross and obvious parts of people's lives, which is, for example, the job they do. That's an objective piece of information. You've got their curriculum vitae. You can see what job they've done, or what jobs they could do, or what university studies they've done, or what technical qualifications they have. And they've either done those things or they haven't done those things. It doesn't matter what the person's like, what their personality is like, or whether they're an INTJ or an ESFP or whatever. It doesn't matter. And there's no subjective evaluation for that at all. It doesn't require any. You take the whole criteria of subjective validification out the window. So you need to start with things that can be objectively verified. And so this is what I say, Mark. This is what I say, Rebecca. If you can't work out someone's job for a hand, give up. Go home. Go and learn macrame or something. If you've been doing hand reading for more than a year and you can't work out what jobs people do from their hands, you're looking at it the wrong way. You're focused on the wrong things, or you've got the wrong way of thinking about it. And so, John, when you're doing that process, I mean, because you did 3 or 4 iterations on that paper before back and forth with me, it's like a lot of the time it's refining and refining and just distilling and cutting out the wood from the trees and saying, and as you do that, that's like getting the lens of a camera and sharpening the focus and getting more and more and more in focus. And you've done a good job. Because when you've done a good job, the person whose hands they will come back to you and say, "Oh my God, that's 100% me," which is what happened in the case with you. So it's not like, "Oh yeah, that just sounds a bit like me. Oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I think he's always done quite well. Oh, it's almost." No, it's got to be, that's exactly what I'm like. And if you can't do, that's exactly what I'm like, you're not a good hand reader. And the only way to establish that, Mark, is to do a written test. You have to do it on a handprint of someone you don't know. You have to subject yourself to the verification process by handing it in and having it corroborated. And that's the kind of standard that you need to set for yourself. If you can do that, then you'll become a really, 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 really extraordinarily good hand reader, of which there are probably no more than about a dozen in the world.
Okay, but Christopher, what about people who are not suited for their jobs and like just having jobs that they may not have been happy with their whole life? I mean, just
What,
having a
what,
job is not an indication of their suitability for that job.
because when you say to them, you should have been a lion tamer, they say, "Oh my God, I always wanted to be a lion tamer." That's what happens. Is what you reawaken. What you reawaken is what they really wanted to do when they were a kid before they were sexually abused by their stepfather.
Mm.
Most of the time, people aren't doing what they're doing, what they kind of should be doing in their lives, is because their life has been derailed by trauma.
But also, there are complications like when we were discussing my hand the other day. It's like I don't feel like there is something that combines all of the contradictions in my hand. So it's not
Absolutely.
always easy to find something that would fit.
Yes,
Not
but I
everybody's
should, but I
suitable.
should still better describe the kind of things that you're interested in doing,
Yeah.
and
But
that
that doesn't always amount to a job. Not
I
everybody
totally
has that.
agree. I totally
Yeah.
agree. I'm not. Yeah, don't be too litigious about that. But you're quite right. I mean, you are a peculiarly unusual configuration, Kellyanne. So you're right. It's difficult and it's challenging, and that's why people like you study hand reading. But the majority of people, Kate, the majority of people, fine hand shape, air skin texture, 8 loops. Long index fingers, short low set air fingers, and a straight major airline that ends underneath the ring finger. I mean, like I'm probably either a loop of serious or a loop of good humor. You've got that profile like that. That's a fairly standard set of handprint configurations, Ellen, which means the majority of jobs in our culture will cater for those people. What does that mean? That means working in an office or working in a business in a part of a team, either doing something you love doing or something because you're very conscientious and hardworking about it. It doesn't require too much intellect, doesn't require you to be an academic, but you've got some level of knowledge that's practically applied and usefully applied in that kind of way. I mean, it's like and a long index finger, so you've got some management and leadership potential. There are so many jobs like that because we live in a world which prioritizes corporate work in offices. corporate work in offices, Ellen, will kill you. Okay, just so you're quite
I
right.
know, I've tried it and I did want to kill myself. I had to
Don't.
leave.
I really recommend you don't try to do it. It's completely the wrong thing for you. You
Yeah.
should be a macrame artist or something like that and sell little widgety creative things that you've made out of natural materials at local markets,
Yeah.
and you'll be poor for the rest of your life. And I'm sorry about
And
that, but
that's what I've been doing, love.
well, exactly,
Which
but
is
that's my
been
point. If you don't fit in,
reinforced.
the significant point about what you're saying, Alan, is important. When you're doing vocational analysis for people on their hands, you do have to take into consideration practical factors as well. If a
Yeah.
woman's a single woman in her 30s and she's got three children and she's got to work, she's going to take and the only job's working in the meat factory. It doesn't matter whether she's a budding artist. She has to go and get a job. So there are factors like that as well. So there are practicalities, but in principle, if you're looking at a hand, you should better work out what kind of jobs that they do. And that's an important thing to look at from the hand.